Hello everyone. I am delighted to be back here at the Grayslake Heritage Centre with Michelle and Charlotte, and we are in their wonderful annex where you can see some of the vehicles that have been used in Grayslake over the years. I wanted to come back because last time I left having had a wonderful chat with you both, but I wanted to ask more questions about the history, so thank you for having me again.
We're glad you decided to come back.
Well, I should get the interview right this time, shouldn't I?
I am looking forward to your wonderful questions.
Thank you very much. And without further ado, I wanted to ask why there is Grayslake one word and then Grays space Lake over the kind of periods, and when you look at the actual name of the lake, what is correct and where did it come from?
That question is asked all the time, and it's a hard one to answer.
Okay.
We incorporate it as two words. However, it is said that the post office changed it to one word. Word has it that one reason might be because we could not use a punctuation mark in the title.
Right.
But who knows? Grayslake was very slow back then because it took a few years before it became one word. Even back as late as 1940, you would see it used as one word. So that was many years after our incorporation.
Right. Huh, how interesting.
But
Still
of
not
course-
settled now.
But of course it gets its name from William Gray, who settled or had land along the south shore of the lake. And eventually you call it, let's go to see Mr. Gray's lake, let's go fishing there. And
Very
so
cool.
that's how the name evolved.
I like that. That's very fitting. And tell me, obviously the Heritage Centre is right next to the fire department here. Tell me a little bit about the history of the fire department. And of course, we're sitting in front of one of their fire trucks.
We are. So this is Wilbur. Wilbur is a 1954 fire engine. It was modified, built here in Grayslake from the chassis of a Chevy truck. It was put in use by the fire department and was in use until the 1990s even.
Wow.
It's a long time. I've been told at that point that it was a backup to the backup. It was not the most commonly used fire engine, but it has an easy to operate pumping mechanism on the front, and it's very difficult to drive, so it made an excellent vehicle for training. And it was given to the society and lives out here in the annex. Wilbur is in parades, so if you go to the Memorial Day parade and the Summer Days parade, you can see Wilbur driving through town.
He was nicknamed Wilbur by one of our now deceased drivers. He named it in honor of one of the fires that Wilbur served at.
Oh, really? Okay, so how did the fire department come into being here in Grayslake?
Because there were fires. You know?
Ask a silly question, get a silly answer. That's what my mum used to say.
I know. At first, when there were fires, everyone would rush to
Right.
volunteer, and eventually, what would happen? You group together. Let's form a group, and that's so. And after the one Wilbur fire, 1899, it was formed.
Right. And I saw something from yourself, Michelle, that it was organised through one of the major employers in the village.
It was. There was a business in town that had a big impact on it. It was a volunteer-run fire department, and so when there was a fire, you wouldn't call 911. There was no 911. You'd call to the Gelatin Company. And the engineer there was always someone on staff to answer the phone. He would take the details of the fire and then sound the whistle, so the volunteer firemen could hear it and would know to rush to the fire station, which was in the village hall, which happens to be our building, actually. So this was the first floor of the Heritage Center, one of the wings. The first person to arrive, I've been told, would hear the phone ringing, and that was the engineer calling the building. The first person there would write all the details of the fire on a chalkboard, And when they got enough firefighters to take off, they'd leave with their equipment and go to fight the fire. And if you came late, you could see all of the information you needed on that chalkboard, and you could head to where you needed to go. And that happened, gosh, I can't remember when that ended. That was for a significant period of time. The society has a really great letter from the fire chief thanking the Gelatin Company for their time and letting them know that they have their own system now to coordinate firemen. But for a long time in Grayslake, people remember the sound of the call from the Gelatin Company to fight fires.
Wow.
It was a special whistle. You could tell it was a fire whistle or a whistle to call people to work.
Wow.
And I was back when I remember teaching many, many years ago. I won't tell you how many, that's not fair. But anyway, you would be in the classroom and all of us, we looked out the classroom after the fire whistle went off, you would see our superintendent car leave the parking lot as he headed down to be a volunteer fireman.
Wow. Wow.
Didn't he always back in? I remember reading somewhere that he liked to back in so he could take
You could
off.
just shoot straight out. Makes a lot of sense. So, Grayslake had its gelatin factory, major employer in the village. What influence, or how did that influence the village and the growth of the village, and what other businesses had a major effect on the village over the years?
Ooh, for one thing, during the Depression, it did not stop working. So
Crucial.
people did not lose their jobs, and the economy in Grayslake did not suffer greatly.
Wow. That's hugely important. Very lucky as well, given what was going on across the US and the world.
Yeah.
Huh.
So the Gelatin Factory did a lot for its workers in its early years. They had picnics and they took care of each other.
Very nice. And how long was the Gelatin Factory here?
Pardon?
How long was it here?
Ooh, 1922 is when it bought the first property from Nestle's. And then later bought from the canning factory. And then the last production was in 1980s. Is that right, Michelle?
Yeah, yep.
Yep.
I want to say 81, 82, right around there.
Yes, and it evolved into the Great Lakes factory.
Great Lakes Gelatin.
Yes.
Which I think is now Great Lakes Wellness. I think they've rebranded too.
Yes.
Right, right.
So it, like many things, evolved, changing through the years.
Yeah, absolutely. So it went from farming to gelatin, and was there any other businesses in the area that were significant?
Ooh, there are lots of little ones. We once had a rug making company. We had made towels, scales, various things.
Various things.
But many of them just, they come and they go.
And they can go, right. And of course, 1929, the Great Depression, also saw something else happen in the US, and that's Prohibition. How was the village affected by Prohibition?
So Grayslake actually went dry before National Prohibition.
Huh.
The Avon Township had a vote in 1916, so 4 years before the 1920 National Prohibition, and they voted to go dry. There were bars on Center Street, and those closed. Some moved to other places that weren't dry, and others turned into something new. One of my favorites is the bar that is now Charlie's, was a bar pre-Prohibition. It closed and then turned into a silent movie theater. So they renovated and they added, or they would have local people come in and play the piano to accompany the movies. So Grayslake has that story. And then one that we found, we just didn't exhibit, called Grayslake Bars and Prohibition. When the area voted to go dry, it said that the village fathers, the village board, were not happy and said there was no more money to keep the streetlights running. So they kept the streetlights off in town for months afterwards, until they finally turned them back on. And according to the newspaper article, people in town came and serenaded the mayor in thanks for turning the lights back on.
Wow, wow.
And of course there were blind pigs. Like some of the local farmers had their own blind pigs, and there would be raids.
So there was little speakeasies going on all over the place, perhaps. Gosh, what a time.
There's the Grayslake Hotel was on Center Street, and there's a great quote from an article that they were caught serving alcohol because there were complaints to the sheriff department that men would come home from the meat auction there and spurn their meals for their beds or not come home at all. So they'd come home and wouldn't want to eat and go straight to bed, or they just wouldn't come home, and that was what prompted the sheriff's department to have to look into this.
Very interesting. And were there any kind of famous or infamous characters in Grayslake's history? Who's the most interesting figure?
You know, that's an interesting, it's a loaded question in a way, because how do you think of famous and important? How do you separate them? In my mind, do you go to Pete Newhouse, who was long gone, but he was a local newspaper publisher, later owned Pete's Park. He had a great influence on the town. Or you can fast forward to Bob Churchill, who ran for Secretary of State. Tried to put Grayslake on the map that way. Then we have the famous artist, Charles Longbow, and who was a well-known internationally. So it's hard to, where do you go for famous, important, infamous? I mean, do we want to talk about the woman who harassed Dave Letterman? I mean, that's a great...
Really?
that's a great...
I want to hear more about that.
That's a great story, but does Grayslake want to broadcast that or not?
Perhaps not.
The scandal with the postmistress.
Yes. And there are many scandals, yes.
Yeah. What's the scandal with the postmistress?
Do you want to?
No, go ahead.
I'm going to remember, I don't remember all of the details on it, so feel free to pipe in, but there was a woman who was the postmistress in town, and she was accused of reading mail. There was a minister who was in a courtship, and information about his relationship was leaking to the rest of the community, and he accused her of opening his letters and then spreading rumors about him.
Wow. And was it ever settled? Was she guilty, or was she...
Oh, I don't remember.
It kind of faded into the sunset.
Right.
You know, there are lots of stories that fade into the sunset. In any typical small town.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Someday, they will all come out. You have to wait enough years, well, when people will no longer try to hide them.
Very true. You should write a book.
I always say she should
should
have a
write a book.
file that's locked. You know, do not open.
The Grayslake Files.
Do not open for 50 years.
No comment.
Actually, that is something for the time capsule.
Yeah, there you go.
You should put secret stories in the time capsule.
But that's in 25 years, and what I know should not be told in 25 years.
Okay. Do a separate one.
Yes, separate.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much once again, ladies. It's an absolute pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing
Oh,
your
it's been
stories.
a joy. I wish, you've got to take us with you to England so we can hear stories of England.
I would love to. Do you fit inside a small case? I'll wheel you on the plane.
I will pay my own airfare if you will open your doors when I come to England.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You
Is
can
that a
stay
deal?
with my family in England.
Everyone hear that?
It's on camera.
It is.
Darn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.